The assisted bill has returned to Parliament and has received renewed interest from members of Parliament who are intent on quickly passing it into law again. It appears to have noble intentions, providing individuals with dignity to as they choose. Upon further examination, however, it is evident that this is the epitome of reverse eugenics, rather than being used as a mechanism to protect and improve the British gene pool by merely keeping disadvantaged, low IQ, dysgenic, or treasonous individuals from reproducing. This bill aims to facilitate the quiet and efficient disposal of the most vulnerable members of society, including elderly, disabled, chronically ill citizens, and low-income working-class Britain. There is no public discussion whatsoever about how mass immigration from low IQ nations and individuals who promote cultural treason continue to dilate our populational goods with no restrictions whatsoever. This is not an act of compassion, but rather an insidious form of reverse eugenics directed against the wrong demographic. Today, we're looking into the newest assisted and euthanasia legislation under discussion for passage in 2026. We're linked to the ongoing eugenics debate, which I've previously discussed. We will seek to clarify the definitions of positive and negative eugenics, demonstrate how this bill is total antithesis of good population management, review the many moral and legal implications of allowing state sanctions. This paper will have an extensive discussion because of the total impact this bill has upon the British gene bank, upon the most vulnerable members of society, and upon the long-term future of the United Kingdom. Eugenics, or the term means good genes, was coined in 1883 by Sir Francis Galton, who was a British scientist and first cousin to Charles Darwin, to describe the science that can help improve the inborn qualities of human population through instrumentation, such as breeding, and the application of social policies on how to conduct society. Positive eugenics encourages people with desired traits like intelligence, physical health, strong character, civic responsibility to reproduce as much as possible by imposition of monetary incentives to have children, education on the benefits of even larger families, and the advancement of cultural norms that will promote high-quality reproduction. Negative eugenics, however, attempts to decrease the population capacity of individuals who have significant heritable disadvantages, such as very serious genetic disabilities, very severe intellectual disabilities, or other traits that create significant societal cost over the long term, and are therefore both individually and collectively disadvantaged. The history of all civilized societies has involved some form of eugenics thought. Examples include the prevalence of arranged marriages in advanced civilizations that typically favored unions of individuals of good stock, the social pressure on individuals and communities to reproduce with their best of their ability, and, in some cases, government policies designed to reduce the ability of the severely dysfunctional to reproduce. In the early 20th century, Britain had a robust eugenics movement, and most of its most well-known proponents, such as Sir Francis Galton and members of the Eugenics Education Society, advocate for voluntary measures that may have improved or even helped to reproduce what they called the national stock. The stigma surrounding the term eugenics today is primarily as a result of the horrific abuse of eugenics by the National Societies during World War II, abuse that took the form of forced sterilisation and programs of extermination. The Nazi affiliation has since been manipulated as a weapon against rational discourse on eugenics and the quality of the population. There is nothing inherently evil about the fundamental principles of eugenics. Genes that actually matter. Society must consider the long-term quality of its population, and we should encourage persons of ability while dissuading persons of extreme dysfunction. Prior to the advent of mental health institutions, adoption policies that promote the stability of family units, and a societal culture where high IQ and high trust individuals were the norm in raising children, Britain accepted these principles as a part of its social fabric. The discussion of eugenics has now been removed from any meaningful discourse within the political arena, while at the same time millions of immigrants are imported from countries that have much lower IQs on average than the native population, and who also experience high rates of certain genetic diseases or conditions and cultural patterns that, at best, create significant challenges to high IQ, high trust society. Maybe like a vending machine in Korea, where you walk up into the shop and pay, and if a supposed doctor or engineer came by to buy something, he might accidentally enrich the shop and its products and then pay it later instead of paying now. As a result, the native British gene pool is becoming diluted and degraded through slow, methodical dysgenic process where the natives are being depopulated while the dysgenic people thrive. The assisted bill and how it's being dealt with it now. The current terminally ill adults or end of life bill, presented as a private members bill by Labour MP Kim Leader-Beater, will allow mental competent adults living in England and Wales who have been given a prognosis of 6 months or less to live to be able to ask for assisted if they have passed through the appropriate safeguards that would involve assessments from 2 doctors and from an expert panel or judge. It's already been able to go through the House of Commons in June 2025, but has now failed to go through the House of Lords after filibuster of 1,200 amendments. However, supporters of the bill have committed to reintroducing it at the next parliamentary session beginning in May 2026. The bill is being vigorously promoted by a coalition of Labour's MPs, some Liberal Democrats and lobby groups such as Dignity in Dying, and being billed as offering compassion and dignity to the terminally ill. In practice, however, the bill is written so broadly that it opens the door to state facilitated for far more than just the terminally ill. It targets the vulnerable, elderly pensioners who feel like a burden on stretched families or the NHS, disabled people who care costs are rising under net zero and migration pressures, working class Brits with chronic illnesses who can't afford private treatment, and people suffering from depression or isolation who might be subtly pressured by relatives or doctors facing NHS waiting lists. Countries that have gone down this road, like Canada with their MIID, Belgium and the Netherlands, have seen the criteria expand rapidly to include mental illness, autism, poverty, and even tired of living. The same pattern is inevitably here. The state that refuses to control borders or address dysgenic fertility trends is suddenly very eager to offer death as a solution to the problems it created through mass immigration, economic mismanagement, and the collapse of family support structures. This is not voluntary euthanasia for the terminally ill in unbearable physical pain. It's a cost-saving measure dressed up as dignity, timed perfectly as the NHS strains under demographic change and the pensioner population grows. This bill is the perfect example of inverted eugenics. Real eugenics would aim to strengthen the British gene pool by encouraging high IQ, high character, high trust native Brit to have more children while discouraging reproduction among those with severe heritable disadvantages that impose massive costs on society. Instead, this legislation quietly removes some of the most vulnerable native British people, often the very elderly who built this country, the disabled who deserve protection, and working class families who are already under huge pressure from economic decline and cultural erosion. At the same time, we continue to import subsidized large families from populations with significantly lower averages on IQ, higher rates of cousin marriage, and cultural patterns that demonstrably dysgenic for a high-trust, high-IQ society like Britain. We never have a national conversation about encouraging high-IQ, high-character British people to have large families. We never discuss the long-term effects of low-IQ immigration on crime rates, welfare dependency, educational standards, or societal trust. But we're suddenly very comfortable with offering state-assisted suicide to our own elderly and sick as a way to reduce the burden on the system. This is not compassion, it is demographic replacement by stealth. The same elites who scream eugenics is evil, when anyone talks about protecting the native gene pool, are perfectly happy with policies that accelerate the decline of British people while importing replacement populations. as a moral and legal option for the terminally ill in unbearable physical pain is one thing. Turning it into a state-backed pressure valve for the problems caused by mass immigration, dysgenic fertility, and the breakdown of traditional family structures is something else entirely. Low IQ migration and treacherous elites who enable it are ignored or actively encouraged. It's eugenics, but it's inverted. Instead of weeding out the dysfunctional, it weeds out the most vulnerable native of the stock. If the state really truly cared about the gene pool and the future of Britain, it would have secure borders, incentivise high-quality births among the capable British people, and protect the vulnerable, not offering them the assisted exit while replacing them. Real eugenics would protect the strength of the British gene pool. This bill does the opposite. It disposes the vulnerable while the very dysgenic trends are ignored and encouraged. So anyway guys, hope you enjoyed this video about me talking about the assisted suicide bill and also to do with the part of the eugenics and especially to do with reverse genics, because I was keep thinking of the whole reverse genic stuff where she is quite obviously like instead of like doing proper eugenics, it is now just doing it in obviously like within reverse. And because of this, you're going to start to see slowly lower IQ people breeding, and the offspring isn't going to be as good. And it's not just also the IQ, but it's also going to be the quality of the births. People are going to have, for example, people have talked about the rise of autism, which I think is more of a case, like, for example, people saying, oh, autism is eugenic, which, you know, is quite scary because obviously if someone is very vulnerable from autism, maybe not someone like me necessarily, because obviously I'm not that dysgenic. I don't think there'd be, like, for me, for example, if we did eugenics with a criteria for autism, obviously if someone's like severely autistic, like basically can't properly speak, sometimes in some cases, some people can even be very, I guess, unsociable or I guess antisocial behavior. And obviously, in my opinion, I think that, you know, when it comes down to autism, you know, in those types of cases, it would obviously be me, maybe in a case of obviously assisted suicide. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know, these people shouldn't just be encouraged that, but it's also to do with obviously trying to keep, you know, low IQ people out of the gene pool. And obviously that can go into something like the mixed race question, which I've also, I don't think I've necessarily covered in my eugenics, but obviously some people would say that if you breed with like a high IQ, like black person or whatever, but I think again that's another question. But the problem is that when it comes down to an IQ scale, obviously, like when someone has like a black mother and a white father, the IQ ranges between 90 to 100, which in my opinion it needs to be at least above 100, because the problem is with people who are like midwits, in my opinion, I think a midwit is someone between 90 to 100. I think that, you know, trying to find someone with those traits, which I don't think is that hard necessarily, because I think for example, within the UK, there are people that are very high IQ. Like, for example, Oxford, I think, and Cambridge, those people should be encouraged to have higher birth rate, but the problem is the state isn't encouraging that. So even if they're highly posh or they come from like a quite high class background, they don't necessarily have bigger families, or they're not going to have bigger families like they would do nowadays. And the problem with this is obviously you don't want low IQ people to encourage it. So if it was encouraged by the state, the problem is that the state encouraging low IQ people to actually have children. And obviously that's going to cause some massive issues. And obviously I talked about the race mixing issue to do with obviously the identity and things like that. But I think it really goes into the depths of how we actually keep the population, you know, not from being completely retarded, because if people are doing that, obviously, like I said, if you have a black father and a white mother, your IQ isn't going to be as high. And even if that's the case, you might have missing prefrontal cortex or more likely to do crime. Again, not going to go into the stereotyping, but what I'm trying to say is that, you know, it's not just necessarily that per se, because obviously if you have people who are treacherous, I think Edward Dutton or the Jolly Heretic, he actually covered this in a video where even if someone has good genetics, it could necessarily be a traitor to that. I don't know if there's necessarily a traitor gene, but maybe that could be an aspect as well of eugenics. And as well, if you want to click on the link in the description below with links to my other channels and my Discord as well.